So the question is a very simple one with a very simplified info. Now, the same information I summarized in the Excel which I've been talking about, yeah? The Excel I gave to you guys earlier on the first exercise we did, yeah? If you look at the third sheet in that Excel, I have summarized that info for question number 23 for of course ease of solving that question in Excel, yeah? So I am now sharing the same Excel so that what I'm sharing is the information you should be looking at, yeah? So again, those who've just joined, you can get that Excel in our class WhatsApp group. I already sent it, yeah? In the class WhatsApp group, I already sent it. So using this information that the question gave, yeah, you can now answer what the question required. There were two requirements in terms of part A and B, and part A has number 1 and 2. Similarly, part B has number 1 and 2. So part A number 1 says that calculate NPV and XNPV of the project, and hence determine whether the project is viable. So we can very quickly calculate NPV. So I will say that we have the solution. We have the solution. So that we have required part A. We have required part A number 1. We have required part A number 1. Now part A number 1 require we compute two things. One is NPV, and then related to NPV, we have something we call the XNPV. The XNPV. Now we have not yet discussed number 2. We have not yet discussed the second one, but once we have NPV very shortly, I'll explain what the XNPV means. So how did we say that we compute the NPV figure? I said that you'll have an equal sign. Being a function, you start with an equal sign, yeah? Then of course, you'll type NPV, and then you'll have open bracket. Open bracket. When you do the open bracket again, Excel gives you the formula for getting NPV. Down there, Excel says that start with the rate. So I pick the rate of 8%. Then I do a comma. It then says that you pick value 1, value 2, value 3, and so on, of course, to the last value. I said that the values are the cash flows. The values are the cash flows. The first cash flow, which is a negative, remember, is the initial outlay. So leave it alone, leave it out. Begin from the second value. So begin from the second value. And then, because you are picking all the values to the last, just highlight all. Highlight all. And then close the bracket. Close the bracket. And then say plus. plus now the initial outlay plus now that negative 10 million. What we get as NPV is therefore that is the answer. Yeah? We get 791,273.16. Aiden, please ensure you always mute on your side, yeah? So that you don't make noise to the whole class. Aiden, please mute on your side. All right. So that's how we compute NPV, yeah? Is there any question from anyone? Is there any question from anyone? All right. If there's no question, then we can get the XNPV. We can get the XNPV. Now, what is this which we call the XNPV? The XNPV.
Question.
Yes.
I thought NPV, you said the initial outlay. What is the formula for an NPV? Why did you add the initial outlay?
Why did I add the initial outlay? Normally,
instead of subtracting.
Because it is already a minus. Maureen, the moment it is a minus, to minus it, you add, yeah? If you do minus, you know you'll have minus, minus. That's plus, okay?
Yes.
So it's already a minus, so you add, yeah? Sawa?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, thank you. So what is this which we call the XNPV? Now, NPV has a disadvantage, being that NPV assumes that cash flows are regular. NPV makes that assumption that cash flows are regular. And what I mean is, when you come to this initial info, you know we had the dates. We had the dates for the respective cash flows. NPV makes an assumption. NPV makes an assumption that the time difference between one cash flow and another, this time is similar for all the cash flows. It assumes that this date between the second cash flow and the third is the same time difference between the third cash flow and the fourth, is the same time difference between the fourth cash flow and the fifth, which remember may not necessarily be the same. Like now for this data that we have. These cash flows, we say that they are irregular. When they are irregular, NPV is not the correct measure of this value. Why? Because NPV does not take into account these dates. You know, in computing the NPV, we have purely considered the cash flows only. We did not make a reference, remember, to the dates. We did not refer to the dates because NPV assumes that they are what? Regular. So the NPV we compute of 791 is therefore not very accurate. To then make the NPV accurate, we introduce the concept of the XNPV. And what the XNPV does is to then consider, the different dates for these cash flows which are not what? Regular. Now, how do we compute the XNPV? It is also a function, and so you start with an equal sign. So it is also a function where start with an equal sign, then you type XNPV, then you type XNPV, then you'll have open bracket, You realize that when you open the bracket, again, Excel tells you what to do. That pick the rate, then you comma, pick the values, and in this case, please note this. As you pick the values, you pick all. Remember, from the initial outlay. You now pick all the values from the initial outlay, and then you comma, then you pick the dates, So you pick the dates from the first date to the last one. Then, of course, close the bracket and press enter. When you do that, we get the XNPV as the 1,062,559.85. So that is that clear enough, or do I need to repeat? Is that clear enough, somebody? So is that clear enough? Let me hope that is clear. That is clear enough. Yeah. If that's clear enough, then let us proceed on. Yeah. Let us proceed on. So remember that apart from computing NPV and XNPV, the question required that we state whether the project is viable or not. So in this case, NPV is positive. When NPV is positive, then the project is viable. So NPV is positive. So the project is what? Viable. Let's look at A number 2. There was A required part 2. A number 2, where the question said that highlight the cause of the difference between NPV and XNPV. Explain which one you'd use in your analysis and why. So you realize that NPV and XNPV are different. The question is asking why they are different. Of course, the difference is due to, and I'll type this, the difference is due to the fact the fact that NPV assumes regular cash flows, assumes regular cash flows, assumes regular cash flows. Now the XNPV does not make this assumption, does not make this assumption, and hence the reason it takes into account the different dates for the cash flows. So that is the reason why the two differ. The difference is due to the fact that NPV assumes regular cash flows. XNPV does not make this assumption, and hence the reason it takes into account the different dates for the cash flows. Of course, in terms of which one you will recommend, the question also asks why, which one would you use in your analysis and why. For this reason which we have stated here, yeah, the XNPV is of course recommended. Because it is more accurate than NPV. So that's the recommendation. The one we would recommend is of course the XNPV, because it is more accurate, given that it factors in the different dates, remember, for the different cash flows, yeah? So that is there any question on that? Any question before we proceed on to required part B number 1? Is there any question? All right, if there's no question, then we can look at part B number 1, which says that we calculate IRR and what we call X, IRR of the project, and hence determine whether the project is viable. So internal rate of return, the IRR, we said that to be able to compute it, being a function, again start with an equal sign, then IRR, open bracket, yeah? Remember, for it in the bracket, what you need are the cash flows. From the first cash flow to the last one, highlight all, and press enter. What we get is 12%. So what we get is 12%. So in the same respect, we are required to compute the XIRR, which is closely related to the IRR. The only difference between it and the IRR is like in the case of NPV. Again, for the IRR, it assumes regular cash flows, and so it does not consider the different dates. The XIRR will now consider the different dates, which again makes it more accurate, remember, compared with the IRR. So that to get XIRR, again, this is a function. So start with an equal sign, then type X XIRR in bracket, you can see what Excel says you do. That pick the values are the cash flows, the first to the last, then comma, then pick the dates. Because we now factor in the dates, pick the dates from the first to the last, highlight, close the bracket, What you get is 0.1358 as a percent. That's about 14%. As a percent, that's about 14%. That's about 14%. Again, based on these two, we are required to state whether the project is viable. The cost of capital was 8%. When IRR is more, then of course the project is viable. So we shall say that the project is viable. We shall say that the project is viable because IRR is more than the cost of capital. So that is there any question on that? Is there any question? All right, then B required number 2, we are told to highlight the cause of the difference between IRR and the XIRR, and then explain which one you'd use in your analysis and why. So that the difference is more of that we had under NPV. So that I'll just copy that and then edit. So that the difference is due to the fact that this should now be IRR. The fact that IRR assumes regular cash flows, then I'll say that the XIRR does not make this assumption, and hence the reason it takes into account the different dates for the cash flows. So again, the difference is brought about by the assumption by IRR that cash flows are regular. That may not necessarily be the case. And so XIRR solves that problem because it now considers the different dates on which the different cash flows happened. So in terms of which one we would recommend, for use. So in terms of which one we would recommend for use, again, because the X one is more accurate, then of course it is the one that we shall recommend. The X1 is the most accurate. So it's the one that we shall recommend. So we shall say that the XIRR is recommended because it is more accurate than the IRR. So that is there a question on that? Is there a question on that? Somebody? Is there a question on that from anyone? All right. If there's no question, then what I'll do, I will stop there so that we proceed on next week on Sunday. We will proceed on from there, yeah? So thank you very much, ladies. And I don't know whether there's a gentleman. So thank you very much for attending today. Let's meet up next week on Sunday. So thank you. Thank you very much, all of you.